Great, good morning. Thank you for turning out this early after a couple of days. And yeah, I suspect some of you are a little on the tired side. And yeah, it's early, isn't it? Especially East Coast. Actually, it's really late East Coast, right? It's 11:30. It's almost lunchtime. We get to sleep in this morning. That's not how that works, right? Awesome. So you guys are turning out to be a great crowd already. So thanks for getting your coffee early and coming and joining us. So little quick background about me. Disclaimer. Okay, you guys have probably seen this in a few sessions already. But a little bit of background about me. They didn't want some introduction slides, but we're going to do that anyways. So tons of AI art within my presentation. We only talk a little bit about AI, but I have fun generating it. I am the product security research director at Finite State. I do lots of fun stuff, wear many hats, and do all sorts of fun things with IoT and ICS, OT, you name it. I'm also the co-host of Paul's Security Weekly. We're a weekly security podcast. We're in our 19th year. The security podcast is older than our other founding co-host, Marriage. So it's not quite old enough to drink, but it should be able to vote by this year. So the other one too, I'm also a principal instructor with the SANS Institute, where I teach a wireless hacking course and an IoT hacking course. So this stuff is very relevant to my interests. Not only do I get to think about wild and crazy things, I also actually am a practitioner in the space. So Finite State, we do software supply chain stuff in the pursuit of building highly accurate software bill of materials. It's not a sales pitch, but you see where I come out of why I think about SBOMs. I also spent the last 20 years as a penetration tester. So I put on my penetration tester's hat when I start thinking about approaching problems. And I spent a lot of time thinking about, over those 20 years, how I can use data that might not normally be used in an adversarial context. Some of my early forays were that. We're finding that all of the images on Twitter that were being posted when the iPhone started geotagging images, that we could actually get those locations from their photographs before anyone else could, and started publishing a bunch of stuff about where people's locations were. And that got me in the New York Times with Adam Savage, because he was our first stalking victim about some pictures that he had posted. So I was kind of hoping I could see him for lunch. There was an event here that had Adam for lunch, but I didn't get invited. I wonder why. Okay, so, all right, let's get into it. So, SBOMs have entered the chat. Don't want to spend a ton of time on some of the background of software bill of materials, but I feel that I do need to set us up a little bit for some success here. Lots of acronyms to go along with SBOMs in our journey by taking it one to make it, and I'm going to put air quotes here, evil. Hey, we need to know a little bit about CVEs, some vulnerability identification for known vulnerabilities. CPEs on how we can take those vulnerabilities and match them to individual components. And then some VDR, some additional enhancements around threat intelligence and or actual exploitability. Okay. We also need to grab a little bit on the first-party code versus third-party code. If you are a developer of devices, it is very likely that you are not developing all of the software in-house for your device, that you will be reusing stuff that is out there in the environment, including open source software and other software that other folks have developed. The first-party code is the stuff that you develop, that you have control of, and is really easy for you to allegedly generate software bill of materials for. The third-party stuff is the stuff you get from everybody else. You might not know what's in there, so that becomes a little harder. Also, the shift left and shift right, there's lots of discussions about when you should generate a software bill of materials, and I say yes. You should be doing it at both left and right. So do it during your build times at each iteration of your build, and then build one for the final product, the actual thing that you are delivering to your customer. Okay. And we're not going to see this go away anytime soon. Software bill of materials, in my opinion, are here to stay. We've seen lots of regulation worldwide between 524B, the consumer protection stuff, CRA, in Europe, our 2023 Omnibus Bill, as well as the Voluntary Cyber Trust Mark program here in the US. All of these are requiring software bill of materials in some capacity. So yeah, they're going to be there. You're going to need to be generating them. We're hearing folks say in the industry that by 2025, every electronic device that you purchase will have a software bill of material generated and may be available in some capacity. So it's here, and it's here to stay. All right, so looking at my show notes for this one, I screwed this one up. There are no notes for this slide, so I've got to go off the cuff, but I've been doing that pretty well already. All right, so can we use software bill of materials for good? Yeah, absolutely. And I think ultimately that is where this talk is going to end up. Okay, so using a software bill of materials gives us the opportunity to evaluate some of the security of our suppliers. They give us an SBOM. We enrich it with CVE data and some vulnerability data, and really start to see the stuff that we're consuming in our devices as part of our development process. How secure is it really? That's a good thing. Maybe we can push back to some of those suppliers to make some improvements and or know some of the things that we need to improve with them. Okay. From the consumer of a device, I buy a device and it comes with a software bill of materials, and that software bill of materials with some enrichment, adding that vulnerability data, tells me that this device is vulnerable and the manufacturer does not yet have a patch available. As a consumer of those devices, I can now start to make some risk decisions about how I implement them in my environment. Put them in more restricted networks, make them accessible only through a jump host. Maybe it's a vulnerability in the web application and I only manage it via SSH. Let's turn off the web application if entirely possible. So it gives us some opportunities to make some of those risk decisions. Okay. Also, on both the manufacturer side and the consumer side, we can start leveraging software bill of materials to see the commitment to security for both the manufacturers and our suppliers. Are they doing a good job? Are they trying to keep up to date? And are they using a process to update their development methods to make more secure products? All right, now we get to the fun stuff, right? Okay. Can software bill of materials be used for evil? Yeah, they can. Okay, let's talk about why. All right, so some of my friends and coworkers, they would not be surprised if they said my desk at home looks like this. And when we jump on Zoom calls, it's very similar. Maybe the lights aren't red, and well, that guy's beard kind of looks a little bit like mine. And yeah, there is about that much of junk and monitors on my desk because I hack IoT stuff all day. And it may not be the only desk in my office that looks like that. There may be multiple. So, all right, so how can we start using it for some evil? Well, by taking that software bill of materials. Software bill of materials, arguably in this case, pretty benign. It's a list of all the components in our firmware, in our binaries, in our software. What we really get is some value on the evil side when we do some enrichment. The ability for us to take those identified components and tie them to known CVEs. Okay. Those then known CVEs taking that into some threat intelligence. Do those CVEs have proof of concept code available? Are they being exploited in the wild? Are they being used by threat actors? Is there weaponized code? Is it in the Metasploit project? Like, there's some different barriers to entry here. Okay. The thing that I find that was kind of fascinating in thinking about using some of this as software bill of materials for the evil side from my pen testing hat is that we may now have the software bill of materials available to us as a data point to put in our toolbox as a pen tester. And if I can now start to analyze what that software composition is, what libraries are being used, what binaries are there, what applications, what versions, what vulnerabilities are there, and which proof of concept code is already out there for me to start using, I show up to my pen test customer on day one and I already have a path. I already know some of the exploits. I probably already got them downloaded and compiled and verified that they actually run. And do you know how many packets I've done for discovery for these devices on the customer's network? 0. So I've built my attack path before sending a single packet and getting any vision into the environment. Now, that said, I'm a pen tester, and I get paid to do this, and I have contracts and some legal obligations and some ethics. Is everybody on the planet that way? No. No. So that becomes a real question, like when do we start sharing SBOMs publicly? And do we not share SBOMs publicly? Do we make this data available? And I will talk about that when we go through the presentation here. All right, so some jokes here. I really enjoy making the art, so let's do a case study. So we've got this adventure heading off into the wasteland carrying a case. Sorry, it was the best I could do, right? I think it's more about the wasteland than anything else, right? So I'm also one of those types of folks that, prove it. Like, all right, Larry, you're telling me you're going to take this software bill of materials and turn it into an attack path. Show me, prove it. Okay, I'll prove it. All right, so our first target is OpenWrt. And some language here from the OpenWrt website, properly credited, of course. Effectively, open source firmware for embedded devices, IoT devices. I've been in this long enough that we called them embedded devices. To be able to unleash the power of your device with open source software to give you control of your device. Okay. Now, I want to be clear, we are not picking on OpenWrt because they are horrible. No, these folks are absolutely fantastic. Every issue that I've ever seen them have, they've been very responsive to fixing, and they are constantly updating libraries and responding to security issues. A reason they were picked is they just happen to be really, really popular in the IoT space. Not to give it away, but was working with some folks on a partnership and a report, and they analyzed a bunch of different devices. And in fact, with the power of open source, for a consumer to unlock additional feature sets on your device, and OpenWrt being available for use in commercial purposes. Of the number of devices our partner was analyzing, they found that of the 5 devices they tested, 4 of them leveraged OpenWrt. And not only just leveraged OpenWrt, some of them used OpenWrt in their default configuration. Yeah, we just downloaded firmware and we put it on our device and did a few little customizations. Some of them actually went and downloaded all the development and developed their own, rolled their own set of firmware, highly customized additional features, change of libraries. So while it may not be directly OpenWrt, it may be a derivative or their own repackaging as a base. Now, as a consumer and or manufacturer, this becomes third-party code that becomes a little bit more difficult to analyze from a software bill of materials. All right, so you're saying, Larry, great, OpenWrt, lots of IoT devices. How does this affect me from my enterprise? Like, I don't have these consumer IoT types of things in my enterprise. Maybe I have a few that are there, but I know about them. They're limited. They're few and far between. Well, COVID changed everything. Okay, it really did. How many folks, when COVID happened, went to work from home? Okay. How many are still working from home? Okay. When you're at home and you have your enterprise laptop on your home network, right? Your home network full of all sorts of consumer IoT gear. Now, everybody's got a separate VLAN for all their IoT gear, right? Yeah, okay, a couple of you raised your hands. All of your employees in your company all have separate VLANs for all their IoT gear, right? That's what I thought. That's what I thought, yeah. There's some more jokes here about some of that type of stuff, and yeah. So COVID changed everything. You are now potentially putting your enterprise equipment, your enterprise laptops, maybe even some other networking gear, depending on your level of commitment, on a untrusted network, your users' home networks sitting next to potentially a whole bunch of OpenWrt and maybe vulnerable OpenWrt too. So thinking about some of that type of stuff, I actually had someone ask me, was this real? Like, no, this was AI generated. It's a cyber shoemaker, right? You think about some of that stuff, you put folks on that network with OpenWrt, your enterprise devices. Are you going to be vulnerable? Back to that, hey, who has all their IoT stuff on a separate VLAN, and do your folks do? No, I am also guilty of this. Do I have a separate VLAN for all of my IoT stuff? No. You know why? The old adage that my mom always told me was the cobbler's kids' shoes are always the worst. Do you know why? Because that cobbler spends all day fixing shoes, sniffing the leather, doing the sewing, resoling. And what's the last thing that cobbler wants to do when he gets home? Look at another pair of shoes. So when do you think his kids' shoes get fixed? Never, right? I do hacking and I do IoT stuff and I sit in front of a computer all day long. Do you know what the first thing that I want to do after I have dinner and sit down on the sofa is? Reconfigure my entire network to make it more secure? No. I don't want to even touch the computer. I've sat in front of this thing for 10 or 12 hours a day already. I consult the little rectangle of knowledge for Facebook. The phone, right? The rectangle of knowledge. Yeah, exactly. So I am as guilty of this, and I am a security professional, darn it. And I make these same mistakes. And I am in the same condition as many of your enterprise users that are putting their enterprise gear on those networks. So can we make it work? Yeah, a little bit of death by data, right? So OpenWrt doesn't provide SBOMs currently for their project, but their code is hosted in GitHub, and we can get software bill of materials from GitHub. But they also provide the ability to download their development environment so you can roll your own, and they provide the firmware free and open for anybody to download. So if they don't provide an SBOM, we can generate one. And then this comes back to me going back and forth about whether or not SBOMs should be public or private and shared with only individuals. Because if they're private, there are many cases where I can just go grab some tools and generate my own software bill of materials with various degrees of automation for going down and generating that and going through the enrichment process. All right, so I go download their firmware, and I work for Finite State. We generate SBOMs. So I uploaded the firmware into our platform to do the automated analysis. And it says that I've got 1,563 findings. That's a lot. But in reality, the ones that I care about are those 38 high and the 10 critical. This doesn't sound good. So digging into those, I can see that there are, in the critical side, there are at least 3 CVEs related to Lucy. Lucy is the web-based interface used for managing OpenWrt. Okay. So let's dig into a couple of those CVEs. Okay. And I know there are at least one person in this room that will get the joke, right? Or get the Lucy, you got some splaining to do. Okay. This is the time where I have to explain it to some of our younger crowd, right? So yeah, from the I Love Lucy show, yeah, I am old enough to have watched this in syndication with the family. So yeah, at least in reruns, not old enough to have seen it on TV when it was live in many cases. It's too young. Okay, but Lucy, you got some splaining to do. All right, so looking at the details for CVE here, 12772 if I recall, and can read that from here. You start looking at some of the threat intelligence for that individual CVE, and it's considered high, critical, and that we do have some proof of concept code available. Larry, what's the landscape look like? Well, go to Shodan and search for Lucy, L-U-C-I, and Shodan tells us there's, at the time of this slide, there was about 61,000 directly internet-connected exposures of Lucy out there on the web. Okay, 61,000 possible out there directly accessible to the internet. The problem here is that OpenWrt doesn't tell us which version. So are these actually Lucy 0.10, the vulnerable version that had the CVE? We don't know that, but the SBOM knows that, and our analysis could tell us that. Okay, so not just for folks using that in maybe their home network, so not just for tinkerers, potentially some of these are in enterprise. All right, so we got some CVEs, we've got some targets. We've got some proof of concept potentially. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Well, based on CVE 2019 12272 for Lucy 0.10, there is a bunch of particular findings here for stuff with proof of concept code exploited by threat actors, reported in the wild. All right, let's go dig into some of those. And sure enough, my threat intel feeds were actually lacking. They didn't have some of the proof of concept code available because some of my threat intel feeds didn't actually have this particular source as a good source for threat intel. So thanks to the power of community, I went to one of our threat intel feeds and said, hey, have you guys heard of these? Because my stuff finds CVEs and you're missing some because I consulted the Google and they also found some stuff. Now, some of my problem is that, yeah, it's in Chinese. I don't read Chinese, but Google Translate worked really well. And this particular proof of concept was incredibly helpful because not only did they provide me some proof of concept Python code, they also gave me a virtual image of the version of OpenWrt that was vulnerable to test against. Now, do you think I'm going to trust a virtual machine made by someone else to put on my network?
Of course you are.
Of course I am. Yeah, we've established this problem. Cobbler's kids' shoes. Yeah. No, I actually did go and build my own OpenWrt virtual machine for this one. There's a certain level of trust, right? All right. So now we've got some exploits, and we've got a vulnerable target. Does it work? Yeah, all right, this is a cool proof of concept. We can throw our Python code against my device at 172.16.123.1.129 and provide it a username, the default of root, and give it some commands. Well, that's cool. The first one, get a directory listing, and it's the directory listing of the web server content. And then on the second one, we'll interact with the file system. We'll touch a file. We'll create a new file on the file system called pwned. And then we'll get a directory listing in the third one. Cool, I can create files on the file system. Great start, right? Like, what does that really get us, though? But you add a little bit of Unix command line kung fu for executing some commands and using some FIFOs and the copy of Netcat already installed on OpenWrt. Yeah, we found that via the software bill of materials too. Hey, and I set up a Netcat listener, run the command, and we get a shell. Now we've got a pivot point. Yeah, right? Yeah, I was trying to find some appropriate memes here. Like, yeah, now we've got a shell. We've got a shell on an OpenWrt device that's maybe on the same network as some of your enterprise stuff. All right, let's take a little bit deeper dive. I mentioned that not only did we find some exploits available to start interacting with the device based on what we saw in the software bill of materials, we also look at the rest of the software bill of materials to see what other things were there, such as Netcat. What other things can we use? Specifically, let's take a look at an unnamed network appliance that had saw some attention in the media fairly recently. We won't name vendors. It's not the goal here is to go embarrass a vendor, affect their stock price, and so forth. If you dig, you can figure it out. We're smart people. We have access to Google. The point here is it's about the process and not the fact that a specific company had a vulnerable product in this case. Okay. So this particular device was a network appliance. It's a VPN concentrator. Okay. That already starts to think good things about me because that's a way, if I can compromise that VPN concentrator, it's connected to other networks internally and providing some good access. Okay. It was found to be exploited in the wild. In fact, in February, CISA, with a bunch of other agencies, provided some remediation guidance, IOCs, and so forth against this particular device. It's also my understanding, and I'm making some assumptions here, that they didn't necessarily follow all of their advice because it was found later that they actually had a device of these types that was in use that got compromised. I wonder where they got their IOCs. Just guessing. I don't know for a fact, but yeah, CISA also fell victim to some of these as well. Okay. And arguably, it's an attractive target because it is an opportunity for us to gain access to a device, potentially be machine in the middle to gather traffic going in and out of that network over that VPN concentrator after it's decrypted, grab credentials, but more importantly, that's got access to other networks from the internet inbound to other networks like a VPN concentrator should do. Okay, so it makes for a great pivot point. Now, one of the things that I really love as a pen tester is being able to live off the land. Okay. What capacity, what capabilities does this VPN concentrator have for me to interact with networks after I'm on the device? Okay. What tools are there that I don't need to install, that I don't need to send now larger quantities of data to the device to install packages, to have more traffic to be observed? Maybe it's not a VPN concentrator, it's some other system that has some endpoint protection on it that is noticing that there are files being transferred there, that the disk space is being consumed, and or that I'm adding additional components to that operating system that weren't there already. Okay. Use the tools that are available. Okay. I have a friend that his favorite way to do pen testing is to go into an environment with assumed breach, yeah, somebody's already in, and then does not use a single exploit to compromise the rest of the network. Everything is live off the land. Use the tools that are in the environment. Okay. So what tools are in the environment to potentially turn this VPN concentrator into an even more valuable target? Okay. Let's go see what we can find for living off the land. So looking at the CISA disclosures about the device that they noted that redacted, that they noted some CVEs for initial access, and that the adversaries that were on the device had been seen using a bunch of tools on the appliances such as FreeRDP, RSH, Telnet, and Nmap libraries. Like the parts that make up some of our software, not necessarily the binaries themselves. So they weren't running Nmap. They were apparently using the Nmap development libraries for Python to create their own tools. The libraries were already there. Okay. That kind of becomes terrifying, that we've given enough tools that we can actually do our own development on the box to develop our own tools as a pivot point. Okay. I know on this particular appliance, as time went on, this particular vendor got a lot more scrutiny about their individual appliances, and that yeah, they had apparently left a whole bunch of stuff behind that had questionable use in its day-to-day operations. All right, so yeah, there's binaries there, but what about those libraries? Let's go take a look at those libraries and see if that becomes a really good target for us. So I promise this is not more COVID, okay, completely different. We were able to get a virtual appliance. They offer it for free on their website for doing some testing. We did an analysis of the virtual appliance, generated an SBOM for it. They don't provide one, but we generated one, and then looked at all of the libraries and see where they were linked to their ancestors and to their children. You know, which libraries are actually in use and potentially called across multiple applications. And while we found that there were a core of libraries that were quite interconnected, but then there were all these ones that were on the periphery, these individual dots that existed on the file system, but we couldn't see that they were tied to any other libraries or any other application. Okay. So why are they there? Okay. So digging into a couple, I went and looked for a bunch of the libraries and thought, well, which ones might be interesting for doing some penetration testing, for gaining access to other systems, for generating packets, and interacting with secure sessions. And sure enough, Python libnmap was there. Okay? So the Nmap libraries for Python were there. dpacket from Doug Song was there. Okay? So we can start doing some packet manipulation and so forth. And Paramiko for interacting with SSH and so forth. And this case was tied to some SCP stuff. So the question becomes, Larry, are these really necessary for operation? Well, unfortunately, I didn't develop the device. But thinking about some of these, yeah, I can see that maybe libnmap is there and used as part of the device. Use a VPN concentrator, you connect to the VPN concentrator. The VPN concentrator scans your system to see what ports are open and what versions, to see whether your system is secure and know where they need to put you, whether you need to update, and so forth. So, all right, I could understand that maybe that is there. They're probably just going to use the binary and not use their own scripts, but that depends. dpacket, sorry Doug, but like dpacket's an antique. Like it's been around for 15 years, and I think the last time I saw an update was 8 years ago. Like they're using software that wasn't updated in 8 years. That doesn't bode well to me. But is it in use? I don't know. I don't think that it was. Paramiko, yeah, I could also see that maybe that is required, especially if, as part of that VPN concentrator, they're hosting their own applications, kind of like what I used to see with something like Citrix. You log into the Citrix portal, they give you a bunch of icons, and you click this one, and it SSHs to a system. Yeah, maybe for something like that. But there are definitely some that are questionable as to why they are left behind on the system. And you saw how many libraries there were unconnected. I only looked at a few, especially those that I thought maybe I could use. But so are they needed? I don't know. Now, the one that I targeted was the Python libnmap. And I know enough Python to be dangerous. I am not a whiz. So instead of just using the binary and using the Python libraries to develop my own stuff, that's going to take me a little bit more time, and maybe would take the adversary a little bit more time. But arguably, I spent 10 minutes with ChatGPT and asked it to generate some scanning code for me using the libpython, the Python nmap libraries. And yeah, I got some stuff to do some scanning really quick. And then I started asking it to use to use Paramiko to send traffic to exploit some specific vulnerabilities that were also found on this device, and some fairly common SSH stuff that had been in the news. And well, yeah, they put some guardrails around that, right? And the longest time of that 10 minutes for me to do this was trying to get around ChatGPT's ethics. And it finally said, yeah, I understand the context you're trying to give me, that you're an ethical pen tester. I'm still not going to give you exploit code. Right. So, all right, I've just got to up my game a little bit. All right. So, potentially a little bit early. We have this concept of taking a software bill of materials, using it, getting the libraries, getting their versions, getting the binaries and their versions, and being able to tie that to vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities, and potentially proof of concept code. This gives us an opportunity to tell a story. Okay? Let's choose our own adventure. Let's choose to do something with this data. And I think ultimately this is the real message of this talk. Can software bill of materials be used for evil? Yeah, but let's not let that happen. I come from a land that is red informs blue. Why do we do pen tests? Okay? To have our pen testers find a whole bunch of issues, potential issues in our environment. They issue us a report, and what do? We fix them, right? Well, that's what we're supposed to do, right? And then we go fix a bunch of stuff, and we realize maybe we have some other security improvements that we need to make elsewhere, and we do those. And then we have our pen testers come back next year. And what do? They do a pen test, and hey, you fixed those things, but we found these others over here, right? And they issue us a report, and what do? We fix them. Yeah, iterative cycle. So using software bill of materials, just like we might with a pen test report, gives us the ability to have that circular sort of interaction. Take that software bill of materials is arguably a really good thing, and it's going to be a thing that we need to do. But use that power for our own improvement. It's up to you to tell the story about how you use software bill of materials in your environment. Okay? They're not going away. You're going to be able to ask for them. You're going to be provided them. Use them to your advantage before someone else does. Right. Enhance them. Software bill of materials unto itself isn't going to be terribly valuable for this process. Software bill of materials at its core is a list of components in your software. It really becomes valuable when you start that enrichment, when you take the CPEs for the individual vulnerabilities and match those to components within the software bill of materials based on the libraries and based on the executables and their specific versions. And now you have some of that data to make some risk decisions. And then enhancing that with threat intelligence really helps us go down that path of being evil, but let's ultimately use it for good. Okay. If you're going to be doing some of this improvement as part of your development lifecycle, and as part of that, instead of getting bent, get vexed, right? So Vex is part of the SBOM standard for us to track the work we're doing. Hey, we've got a library. We've got Lucy 0.10 in our firmware. Yes, it's there. We can confirm that. It's in the SBOM. It's available. But the functions that are vulnerable in the Lucy web interface, we have disabled or we have removed. So while it found the package, those individual spots we don't use. We don't have the ping page available. Same thing for other software development practices. Great, we've got a library, SSL library, but the specific math functions in that SSL library that are considered vulnerable, we don't utilize. So we can mark within the SBOM that, yeah, it's here. We've done an analysis. We do not use those particular library functions so that we can sort of remove that vulnerability tracking from that software bill of materials. It's still there. It's still part of your inventory. So when the landscape changes and we have new vulnerabilities, now maybe new ones show up because you are still using that library, but maybe now different functions. Okay. The other one too is that I see is that if we're not, pardon me here, there's some very specific words I want to include here. So if you're not using software bill of materials to improve your development lifecycle, every iteration of your code commit generates a software bill of materials and getting enhanced. Okay? If you're not using software bill of materials as a consumer to enhance your security posture, evaluate what your vendors are giving to you. Okay? And then maybe change how these things are deployed on your network and how you get access to them. And if you're not including software bill of materials as part of your information gathering for doing pen testing, to start building these attack paths, just like an adversary would, thinking adversarially, you're missing out on some huge opportunities, in my opinion. Now, granted, I'm the one up here talking about it, and I'm saying maybe some of the things that people don't want me to say, but I want us to be educated. I want you to think about that, yeah, there's a whole bunch of awesome around software bill of materials, but there's also times where it can be abused. Like, I think about the Flipper Zero, a little hardware device for doing some hacking. Like, it's an amazingly capable device. It's so much fun. You can do a whole lot with it. But it's allegedly been used to steal cars in Canada. So Canada has banned the Flipper Zero, right? Like, it's like not seeing the forest for the trees. Like, it can do so many things, but it can be used for one bad part. Maybe can be used for one bad part, so you remove it from the marketplace. To me, that's a little short-sighted and not good. No, use them for bad, but you use them for bad. Okay. Take an advantage of the opportunity, use them for bad, and think about improving your processes. Hey, you choose how you're going to use your data or the data you receive from your suppliers. Okay. Choose to use it. Get the SBOMs. Enrich them. Use that data to inform all of your build processes. Use that data to inform the software you're delivering to your customers. Okay. You get to choose the story. Right? And this is kind of where I am still back and forth about should software bill of materials be made available publicly. I kind of like that they might be, because I think that would force folks to be better at building secure software. If you give me a software bill of materials and I can immediately enhance that and find out that you've got some critical vulnerabilities and that there is proof of concept code available for it, have you done your due diligence as a developer? Maybe not. See, my thought here is that as you're using this as part of your development process, you're building a software bill of materials. Take that software bill of materials, think like an adversary, become that red team. Find out, do the enrichment, find out what your devices are subject to for attacks as of that moment. Fix them. You got a report, you got a pen test report, right? It's the software bill of materials. Fix the problems. Spin another version. Run another SBOM, enrich that, see what's left. See what falls out for available vulnerabilities. Oh, there's still 2 more? Okay, we updated this library to this version and that one has some issues too. Great, do it again. Fix them, run another SBOM. So by the time you actually take this and you release it to the market, your SBOM comes back as of the time of that release of, hey, we're in a really, really good state. We did this adversarial simulation, this pen test using SBOMs for evil over and over again, and we've got a really good product that we're really confident in. Okay. That's ultimately my point. Yeah, let's know that our adversaries will potentially use these for evil. Do it ourselves first. You leverage all of that power to remove that from the marketplace so that we are getting ahead of it before someone else finds it. Okay. Now, is that really it? Yeah, I think so. But note that thinking about some of this type of stuff, getting a bunch of data is going to be probably overwhelming and it's going to take us a little bit of time to get there. So, and that we should put ourselves in that adversarial position to help make our stuff better. All right, so what did we learn today and some of my advice? Okay. I think some of the first things, we're going to get a lot of data. And it's potentially a daunting task to add some of this stuff to our toolbox. Okay? I think next week, if this is the path you choose to go down, and I think some of you are interested because you all came out here at 8:30 in the morning, right, after multiple days of this stuff. Okay? Establish an inventory of some of your high priority devices that you want to obtain software bill of materials for. And if your vendors aren't already providing them, ask for them. Okay. Start building that SBOM relationship so that they can provide you one and they can provide you continuous ones over time as the landscape changes so that you can start evaluating some of the stuff on your own. And even as a manufacturer, evaluate the SBOMs of your suppliers. Okay. So it's going to be frustrating, arguably, to start getting software bill of materials at the current landscape. So when you get frustrated and you're not having a lot of success getting a software bill of materials, go watch Matt and Alex's talk on SBOMing a substation from this year's S424 event. They went and Alex works at a very large utility and they wanted to put SBOMs together for every piece of equipment in a substation. And it took them a year to get some of these. And some of theirs, they're still waiting. And they go talk about the whole process and that and their challenges. So in full disclosure, Matt's my boss. So, but the talk was amazing. You think some of my AI art was good? No, his is way better. Okay. Hey. Also, consider evaluating some solutions for generating your own SBOMs. Can you get the firmware? Can you get the software that you're running in your environment on some of your stuff? Personally, I'd love for you to use the stuff for the company I work for, but there are plenty of solutions. And go evaluate some of that. How much time do you want to spend generating that stuff? Because who supports the open source tools, right? The internet, right? Who do you call when something goes wrong? So, but yeah, you get what you pay for, but go do that evaluation. And I'm not going to tell you which ones to use because that ultimately becomes something that makes sense for you and your individual environment. Okay. If you're generating SBOMs to share with folks, figure out how you're going to do that sharing. All right. Make some first passes at some of your validation. If you're generating SBOMs, yeah, go enrich them and see if these things are actual problems and consider adopting some of the VEC stuff. And then after you've sort of got your first round done, make sure you're starting to actually act on some of the things. I know 6 months out, And that may seem kind of long, but your first iteration is probably going to take the longest amount of time. So make sure that you're getting some traction and some action on some of your high and critical vulnerabilities that have identified through the enrichment of SBOMs, and start adopting those SBOMs into your life cycle. Provide SBOMs to the folks that are responsible for doing any of your vulnerability management and analysis in your enterprise or in your development. If you're developing software, use them as part of your CI/CD pipeline, or provide them to your penetration testers to give them more data to give you better results. Okay? More importantly, why don't you just do all three? Right? Insert the meme here of, why don't we have both? Okay? But why don't we have all three? Use them wherever it makes sense. Okay. Continue to make additional passes. Maybe consider looking at some of the mediums and the lows. And then start back at week 1, okay? And expand your scope and make it an iterative process. Now, don't just do those first ones, those critical ones in week 1 and forget about them. No, go back and add more back to week 1. So iterate through multiple times because the landscape does change. You're going to run that SBOM and you're going to do your enrichment. And then what happens 3 days later? We have 300 new vulnerabilities come out and your product is vulnerable to 198 of them, right? Yeah, you need to do that in an iterative process. All right, so thank you. I've got some stickers for SBOMs for evil and SBOMs for good. And I think we have a couple of minutes to do questions. So if you've got a question, I would encourage you to use the microphone. Also, I know some of you are introverts. I'm an introvert, believe it or not. If you want to ask some questions, I will be at following this talk, I will be at the SANS booth. I don't remember whether it's in north or south, but I'll find it. So I'm headed from here over to the SANS booth, and then later today and into early afternoon, I will be over at the IoT Innovation Sandbox. So feel free to come and ask questions. Some of the other folks at Finite State are also there and can fill in for me as needed. So yes, sir, question.
Just wanted to ask briefly about that phrase on the last slide, SBOM relationships.
Yeah.
Because for me, that, even though it's kind of the soft side of your talk, that seems like the hardest part in some ways, is what does it mean to be part of the software factory as a consumer, not a producer of software?
Right.
I'm somehow intimately involved in that process now, and I don't quite know how to start the dance.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think this is some of it. So, how do we start establishing these SBOM relationships? I'm an introvert, right? Relationships are hard. Like, I'm married. I'm lucky I'm married because, someone took the first step, right? So I think that becomes it. Like, somebody's got to take the first step, and it's arguably going to be us. So, go to some of our suppliers, Cisco. Let's go, hey, call your Cisco rep up and say, hey, I've got all these devices in my environment. Can you start providing me SBOMs? Yeah, we'll figure out how to provide some SBOMs. And then as part of that relationship, it's, okay, well, great, you're going to give me SBOMs. How can we continue to get new updated SBOMs? Let's figure out what that process is. And this is one of those that is still also evolving in the industry. Now, Cisco's a big company. They're probably further down the path than some of the other suppliers that you might have. So they're probably getting some better ideas, but this is definitely some things where we can start guiding our suppliers about giving us updated SBOMs and so forth. So we have an opportunity to take some of that control. Okay, awesome. Any other questions? We've got about 1 minute left. Otherwise, I'll use the management phrase. I'll give you 1 minute back in your day, right? Give you the opportunity to walk to another talk. So thank you very much.